Good morning, Winchester Public Library. How's everybody today on Monday morning? This is Erin, and I'm here for our all-booked live stream to talk about books today. I don't know if anybody's going to join us. I hope so. This week, we are going to try to get this video posted up on Facebook. It's episode 3 for me, so we have had 2 weeks of technological difficulties. I can see someone saying hello. Hello, Tanya. I think we'll get it up on Facebook. What I do know about Instagram, I'm going to show you some books a little later, and the words will be backwards. And I think it's an Instagram thing. So I was watching a few of my favorite Instagrammers this weekend, and I noticed that their stuff was backwards too. So it made me at least feel like it wasn't something I was doing. Anyway, welcome. I've already had my second cup of coffee. It's going to be that kind of Monday, which probably means at some point I'm going to have a third. The days are all just kind of blending right now. This morning, I want to talk to you guys about backlisted books. And backlisted books are books that are readily available from a publisher. They were published a while ago, as opposed to frontlisted books or newly released books. As we all know, the newly released books are the ones that are difficult to get out of the library at any time because there's long holds for them. That can be frustrating sometimes, and sometimes that can be what motivates us to go to our favorite independent bookstore and buy a book, hopefully favorite independent bookstore. But there are many, many, many other books in the library, and many of them might be on your to-be-read shelf. That is certainly the case for me. Backlisted books are likely to be available on Hoopla and Libby, and also now through contactless pickup through the library, which you can check out on our catalog at winpublib.org. It's a great way to get some older titles that maybe you've been wanting to read, thinking about reading for quite some time. Another great place to find backlisted titles that you want to read is your own bookshelves at home. And I feel like as consumers, we gather books, we shop, we buy them, we pick them up when they seem interesting to us. Sometimes we put them on our shelf with the great intention of reading them at a later date or even reading them pretty quickly. And before you know it, our bookshelves are overflowing and we haven't gotten to some of those books. And that is definitely the case with me. I have moved several times, and as I was looking through my own shelves this weekend, I realized that I don't feel like I have a lot of books. I don't think I own a lot of books. I try to be a super user at the library. I do buy books occasionally, and I do try to always purchase from a small independent bookstore because I think that they're a very valuable part of communities, especially in a town like ours. Go to bookends. But when I have moved historically, the one thing that sometimes doesn't make it on a move is books because they're heavy, they're cumbersome. And if I've read them, I feel like it's okay to give them away. I don't need to keep books I've read. And I said this to a friend of mine once who is an author, and she was agog. She could not believe that I would ever give a book away or donate a book. I think she's kept, and she's moved a lot too, every book I think she's ever read. She has boxes and boxes and boxes of books. So, to each their own with the books. Why do things pile up on our bookshelves? Well, we are book lovers, obviously. We're all here, library members. Hi, Bhavna. We love to read, and we hear about a book, or we read about a book, or we are in a book club and our book club chooses a book. We hear about something online, a friend recommends something, and we try to get it pretty quickly. And like I said, before you know it, you just have a pile of books. What I want to talk about today is how to work through that pile. And a pile of books for us isn't necessarily always a physical pile of books. A to-be-read pile is often just a list that we keep of books that we have taken note of that we want to read. Same thing that has been recommended by someone, or we've heard about, reading a book review, or reading something by an author and we like the author and we want to go get other books by the same author. So there are apps and book list apps that you can use to keep track of your books. I use Goodreads, and in a couple of weeks I'm going to go over some of the great apps that you can use to keep track of what you're reading and what you want to read. I use Goodreads, and I have almost 400 books on my to be read book list on Goodreads, which is so overwhelming to me that at this point I almost never even look at that list. I choose books essentially based on what I have heard is great and what I see in the library when I'm there working on my shift, which I haven't done for a few months, but I typically worked on Monday mornings and Wednesday evenings, and I would just kind of roam the shelves or look at the area of books that had just been returned, and often that's where I would just grab something that I'd recently heard of. Thus, still reading, but not doing anything to knock off my to-be-read list. And in thinking about why I have added those books to my to-be-read list over time, obviously there's something in them that interested me at the time. And so thinking about a way to sort through our list and approach it in such a way that maybe it's not as overwhelming. So I was listening to a podcast this weekend, an episode of What Should I Read Next, which I mentioned on the first week that we did this live stream. And the host, Anne Bogle, was interviewing a woman who had over 600 physical books in her personal house library that she wanted to read. She had them listed also on her Goodreads, so she was able to sort of export them into a list, which can be really handy for sorting and maybe crossing a few off. But she was chatting with the host about which of these 600 books, how does she even do this? How does she even start to pick up a book? Like which one should she start with? Because 600 is a lot. And what she had done was she had organized all of her books into from A to Z by author and put a yellow sticker on the spine of each of the books she hadn't read. And she said when she looked at this giant, wall, she must have obviously giant bookshelves. She looked at this giant wall of bookshelves, she just saw a sea of yellow stickers and became suddenly completely overwhelmed. This didn't seem to stop her from buying a lot of books, because it seems like every time she went out, she was coming home with 3 or 4 or 5 books, which again is great for the booksellers. So a couple of things to think about if this is you. And again, if it's not a physical pile of books, if it's just a list that you are sort of wanting to work through, especially now when maybe you have a little bit more time to read or a little bit more motivated to pick and choose the things you want to read that are maybe something that makes you feel good, or it's a little bit of an escapist book. You can look at your entire list of books and sort them out, and then look at them and think, okay, where do I begin? First of all, do you need to read every book in your pile of to-be-read books? Not necessarily. My to-be-read books list I have been keeping, in some form or another for all of my life probably. But on my Goodreads, I think I've been using it for 6 or 7 years. And there are books on there now that are not books I would add again, or books that are no longer relevant to the period of life that I'm in, maybe some early parenting books or some dating books, or sometimes there can be self-help books that enough time has gone by that the person who wrote the book, their beliefs are sort of no longer aligned with your own beliefs or my beliefs, and just they don't hit the mark anymore. You can just take those books off. There's nothing wrong with removing books from your to-be-read list. Sometimes it feels like you shouldn't do that. It's kind of like the feeling when you start reading a book and you don't like it and you just want to quit the book, which we'll talk about next week, and that's also a-okay, and I have a huge problem with that, but I'm learning because you can't read all the books. Too many books. One of the books that I constantly have on my to-be-read list that I have tried starting to read a couple of times is The Year of Magical Thinking by Joan Didion. It's a memoir of the first year after her husband passed away. And I started reading it, and it was so upsetting to me that I just couldn't press on. I was not in a mindset to read it. And yet I can't remove it from my list, and I'm not sure why. It just feels like a book I should read. And I think I should only read the books I want to read. I feel like that is something that a couple of my coworkers would say to me, my librarian friends. All right. So we have, for example, 400 books on our Goodreads list. We're talking about me here. I ignore the list. I go to the library and I get something that catches my eye, never working through the list. And I'm overwhelmed. So in listening to the What Should I Read Next episode that I heard this weekend, I was redirected to another episode. And it was with a woman called Whitney Connard, is her name. And she started a blog a few years ago. I think she started with an Instagram page, and then it turned into a blog. It's called The Unread Shelf. That was her Instagram handle, or probably still is. I'm just going to have a sip of my coffee from my Canada mug that is backwards. The Unread Shelf. List of just all of the things that are on your shelf. And of course it was like it's a beautiful Instagram-y bookgram kind of thing with very stylized pictures of books. Through this Instagram project, she started thinking about the unread shelf and the idea of what it would take to read through your shelves. And she started something called the Unread Shelf Project. And I thought it was really interesting and could be a great way for me to approach the unread backlisted titles on my shelf and list, and thought it might be something I could share with you to see if you have a similar problem or just looking for a challenging way to approach books. Sometimes it's fun to just institute a little challenge or implement a little challenge into something that you love to do if it starts to feel dry or stale, to create a project around it, like read a book from the year you were born that was published in the year you were born, or list out your books from author A to Z and go through the alphabet. Read an author whose name ends with A, read an author whose name ends with B. It can get you unstuck from some of the cycles of reading where we just feel like we're picking up the same book over and over, or we're overwhelmed with books and we don't know where to start. So the Unread Shelf Project has been running since 2018, and you can check out her website. I think it's the unreadshelfproject.com, but I'll make sure that you have the right link to go to. Whitney is a nurse, a part-time nurse, and an avid reader. Like I say, she started the project a few years ago, and now she invites people to do it along with her. So I have some of the highlights of her project for this year to give you an example of how it's run. So it's yearly, so she does it month by month. So for example, what you would do in January is you organize your books. You count all of your unread books. You separate them out from the books you've read. And then you implement a no book buying or library borrowing ban. Now, I have to add a caveat for that because I am a librarian and we are here with the Winchester Public Library. Because we're not talking necessarily about all of the books that you own, we're talking about all of the books on your list. You absolutely 100% can use the library. I would say it's probably good to implement a no book buying system or a book buying ban, but use the library. That's my advice. Unless you're just like really, if you have like 600 books on your shelf and you're trying to get through them, but I don't think that's most of us. From all of the books on your list, we'll call it a list, create a sub-list, maybe a top 10, the top 10 books for you to read that year. Some people read, far more books than 10 a year, but we'll just give it 10. That's her number to give it a nice, easy number. And you can prioritize them or you can not. You can just say, these are the 10 that I absolutely want to get through before the end of the year. In the month of February, you can go through all of your pile of books or your list of books and weed out all of the ones that you're no longer interested in. The titles that you have been collecting, that you thought you wanted to read, that you then maybe heard weren't great or tried to pick up a few times and just weren't working for you. Other things, like I said, that aren't relevant in your life anymore. Maybe you have a bunch of dating books and now you're happily married and you don't need the dating books anymore. Maybe you used to be a vegan and now you eat paleo and you want to get rid of all your vegan cookbooks, stuff like that, or vegan titles off your list, something like that. In March, the Unread Shelf Project goal is 7 days of unread books. Now, this is for people who use social media, and it says to list one book per day for 7 days on your Facebook or your Instagram, and I think it's to help you have accountability for the books that you are adding to your list. This is unnecessary, but it would help you maybe in March to narrow your 10 books down to 7 that you're going to start with. Or maybe you've already started reading one of the 10. Or maybe you could do something like put all of your titles in a randomized number generator and, they'll be numbered from 1 to 200 and whatever number you get, that's the book you read. I like those kind of randomized approaches to challenges like this because otherwise it feels too much like a job. March is also a ban purchase month, so don't bring any more books into your house. Definitely still use the library. You might just want to use it to get work through the list though. In June, finish a book in a week and then get rid of it. That's your challenge in June. There's some other challenges through the year. There's something called Unread Book Bingo, but we don't have the playing cards for the bingo. Finish a book in a week. Give yourself to read a book. Give yourself a week to read a book. Or 2 weeks or whatever, but read the book and then get rid of it. Remove it from your library if it's one that you don't want anymore. I try to do this. I don't keep a lot of books, but I do pass books that I love on to friends all the time, and they make their way through circles of friends, and I don't often know where they end up, and if I want them back, I make sure to, put my name in the front. Halfway through the year, do another weeding of all of your library books. Your library list or your physical books. You won't have to weed your library books because hopefully you will have returned those to the library. And then do a recap at the end of the year. But essentially, the Unread Shelf Project is a system to read through the books that you have on your shelf. And I think doing something like that on your own terms would be fun. So I've decided that I am going to do some kind of Unread Shelf Project. All of the books that I do have some books that I've read and kept that I've loved that I'll never get rid of. But most of the books that I own because I have not yet read them. And I've had books there are some that I have moved with me over the years because I know I will get to them eventually, even though here we are, however X many years later, and I'm still trying to get through them. It's very easy to get distracted. In the last few minutes that we have, I'm going to show you 4 of the books that I've chosen from my bookshelf to turn into my Unread Shelf Project. These are 4 books that I 100% want to read, even though one of them was a movie that I really didn't like. And I am going to show them to you, and they're going to be backwards. Like I said, I'm going to have another sip of coffee. And if any of you have read these books, or if any of you have suggestions for backlisted titles, please leave them in the comments. I don't think too many people are watching, but we will get comments when we switch this into Facebook. Okay, so the first book that is on my to-be-read list that has been there for a long time, but I've only recently acquired, is A Tree Grows in Brooklyn which many people have read by this point, by Betty Smith. It was published in 1943. I don't know very much about it, other than everyone says, you should read that book, you should read that book. This was loaned to me by a neighbor, so I've had this for a while, and I still haven't picked it up because I've been reading other things. It's a coming-of-age book. This is what I know about a young girl named Francie Nolan who lives in Brooklyn in the early 20th century with her family. From what I understand, it is not a warm, fuzzy, coming-of-age, feel-good book. It's harsh. But it's beautifully written, and it's a beautiful story, and I can't wait to read it. It's not going to be the first one on my list here, though, of these 4 that I'm going to show you. The second book that is on my unread shelf project for the upcoming couple of months is The English Patient by Michael Ondaatje. I have never read this book. I have owned this book, I think, since it came out. I bought this in paperback when it came out in paperback. I have read This Is the One. I've seen the movie, and I did not like the movie at all. I found it just to be painfully slow. I don't really remember when I watched it, probably when it came out. Not my favorite, but I've heard such wonderful things about the book that I've never gotten rid of it, even though I just keep putting it in a box and moving to a different place and moving it from shelf to shelf. I will read this book. It's set in World War II, and it follows 4 people. It's told from each of their perspectives, and it jumps around through time. The English patient of the title is a soldier who's been badly burned in the war, and he's being taken care of by a Canadian nurse. And I'll follow up with you after I've read the book. The third book on my list has been on my list for a really long time, but again, I only just got this book. It's called The Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver, and my friend Susan gave it to me recently as a gift, and it is one of her favorite books of all time. She gave me 2 Barbara Kingsolver books, and I have not read this one yet, but I'm going to. I'm committing to reading this book in my next chunk of books is going to be these 4 books after I finish the one that I'm reading right now. It's about a Baptist, evangelist Baptist preacher who goes to Belgian Congo with his family, wife and 4 daughters, and what happens to his family there. And that's all I know about it, but I'm looking forward to it. Okay, the last book. I know nothing about this book other than something terrible happens at the beginning of the book, and that's how the story starts. And I have avoided the film. I have avoided anything written about this book, any spoiler, because I don't want to know what the thing is that happens. It's Atonement by Ian McEwan. It's shocking that I have not read this book, actually. Again, I've owned this book. I think I bought this at a used bookstore. Yes, I did. Somewhere, I don't know, years, decades, maybe ago. And I've heard mixed things. I think people love this book. It's an award-winning book, but people have said, oh, it's okay. But I'm still going to read the book. So, currently I am reading a book called Midnight in Chernobyl, and it's about the events of the nuclear disaster in Chernobyl in 1986. So once I finish that book, which is not an uplifting book, I am going to get straight to Atonement, which I think is probably also not going to be a super uplifting book. But it is going to take one book off of my to-be-read list. It is going to help me work through my pile of backlisted books on my shelf. And I am going to go through my Goodreads list, and when we talk about Goodreads in a couple of weeks, and we'll talk about some other ways to keep track of books and keep book journals, I'll get a better handle on how many books are on my book list to be read in Goodreads, and I think I'll also start a shelf for books I own but have not read, and that will be a good way for me to keep track on my computer. On Goodreads, you can keep shelves for different books, or you can shelve books differently so you can keep track of them in different ways. Is it a book club book? Did I read it in 2019? Is it a memoir? I can sort of tag all the books. But I'm excited to start my unread shelf project with these 4 books. And I would like to now share with you a few things that are coming up at the library this week. At winpublib.org, you can check out our calendar. We have started contactless pickups, which will be arranged for you when you place a book on hold. If we have something that we own in Winchester and it becomes available to you on hold, you'll receive an email just like you did before from the library saying that your hold is ready, and then you can contact the library to arrange to pick up your item and return them right back to the library when you're done in the drop box outside. So winpublib.org, and there are instructions right on the main page. You'll see contactless pickup section. This week at the library, I know that there is a teen game night on Wednesday night, which you should register for. Amanda, our teen librarian, is running that, and that should be a lot of fun. We've got some great tech sessions learning how to use Zoom, which, I mean, I think by now we've used so much Zoom. I feel I'm zoomed out like many people. There's going to be a drop-in books chat on the 12th, which is Friday at 1 o'clock. I think that's with Jenny. That'll be a lot of fun to chat about books. Virtual reading group on Tuesday evening, job search resources Zoom, I believe, on Thursday evening. There's lots of great stuff coming up. Some kids stuff. Check out the children's library too. Thanks for joining me today. We miss you at the library. We'll see you sooner. You know, it's coming at some point. It's nice to see more faces out in town. It's nice to be able to congregate from a distance with friends again. And I look forward to chatting with you next Monday at 10 o'clock on Monday morning. We're talking about, let me think what we're talking about. How do librarians help you choose your next book? When you come to the reference desk and you ask a librarian, I'm looking for something to read, but I don't know what to read. What thought process do we put into that? Is it like a random ask the 8-ball thing? It's not. I'll let you in on some little secrets about Reader's Advisory, and we can chat about that, and maybe I will even ask one of my colleagues to join me and we can have a chat about Reader's Advisory during our 30 minutes. Thanks for joining me this morning. I'm Erin. Check out our website at winpublib.org, and I'll see you next Monday. Keep reading.